No, forget it. I'm not, no, you can't make me go out there. It's stinking cold out there. Besides, I've already been out there once today. I'm not going out there again. Oh, hey, hi. Yeah, we were just discussing cold and, well, it's not very nice out, which is why we're in here. And, well, I know you'd rather be out there looking at horses. So would I. Really, I would. But, you got to draw the line somewhere. And, well, the forecast today is very unpleasant. Both last night and today are forecasting lows of minus 38, minus 39, something like that. And, well, for those of you that wonder, yeah, this is in Celsius, but when it gets down to minus 40, it doesn't matter. Celsius and Fahrenheit are the same, and I don't care which scale you're using, it's still stinking cold. Now, since we're whining about the cold and talking about the cold, while we sit in here in a nice warm house drinking a nice hot coffee, I want to talk about horses in cold and horses in winter and some of the problems that occur and some of the things you need to worry about, and a lot of things you don't need to worry about that people worry about for no reason. Well, you see, horses really don't have a problem with winter and the cold like we think they do. And that actually leads to a lot of problems because we try to compensate for the cold unnecessarily, and we actually cause problems for the horses. A well-known lady, she had a blog that was kind of a Q&A thing, and somebody asked her once, how cold is too cold to ride my horse? Well, her answer was pretty simple. It was, it'll be too cold for you long before it's too cold for the horse. And personal experience says that is true. I remember one day I was out, I went out to the horses, and well, they were standing about 75 feet away from the shelter, or about 15 feet away from a bale of hay, and they weren't doing anything except just standing around, and it happened to be minus 40 that day. I took a picture of these silly fools standing around in the cold, not caring about it, just enjoying the day, at which point I decided, that's enough of that. I'm going to go get back in my nice warm car, and that's what I did. So horses don't really have much of a problem with the cold, and I'll tell you, well, the whole concept of cold. What is cold? Well, of course, that depends on where you live, what you consider to be cold, what I would consider to be a nice day. Some people might consider cold, although there are places on this planet with lots of horses that is far colder than this one. And, well, I don't like to go on the subject of blankets a whole lot, but I'm going to because I have to, kind of. And I'm simply going to say that I don't own blankets. I don't endorse their use. I don't think it's necessary. There's very rare occasions that blankets become necessary, and it's usually for selfish reasons, like you clip your horse for showing, and because of the fact you've removed most of its hair, you now have to put a blanket on it to protect it. But horses have existed, well, since the beginning of time, and it depends on how long you think the Earth's been around. Thousands and thousands of years, anyhow. Horses have been around long before man ever invented horse blankets. That's actually a pretty new invention, historically, anyhow, considering the thousands of years they've been around. It's only been in the last, I don't know, about 75 years or so that we've even had horse blankets. And, well, I don't care how good technology gets. I don't think that we can replace what nature has already created that has managed to work extremely well for thousands of years. So that's my opinion on blankets, and that's where we're going to end on that subject. Now, a lot of people get a little concerned about it. Oh man, it's cold out. I've got to do something for the horse, whether it's blanketing it or giving it extra feed or shelter or all this stuff. But like I said, cold depends on where you live, what you consider to be cold, and quite honestly, it's usually you that is cold. Like I said in the beginning, it'll be too cold for you long before it's too cold for the horse, and that comes from somebody, I'm almost tempted to use her name, but very reputable, very knowledgeable, well respected, knows lots about horses. And, the hazards of, the concerns when it comes to, I want to worry about my horse, I want to do what's right for it. Well, I understand that. But unfortunately, when you start looking up articles, whether it's on horse blankets or special feeds for your horse for the winter, you got to be very careful. Who writes that article? Who publishes that article? Because you will find that 99% of them are written and published by people that have vested financial interest. Either they are the people that manufacture the product or people that sell the product. So I warn you, be very, very careful when it comes to the articles you read. Don't just read the article, go, oh, okay, that sounds interesting, I'll believe that. Try and dig a little deeper. You'll quite often find somebody's name on it, or a company name or something. You'll find out when it was written, who it was written by. Do a little homework. Don't just point blank take. It might just be somebody's opinion based on no facts whatsoever, or it might be something that's trying to sell you something. And on that notion, I think you spend a lot of money for no reason on feeds, because one of the things that a lot of people do for the winter, and again, a lot of places it doesn't even get cold enough for, in my mind, to even be called winter. But a lot of people consider it winter, and they think the horse needs extra feeds and stuff. And what they start doing is they start feeding the horses various grains and supplements. And, well, before you spend your money, a lot of money on that stuff, horses' digestive systems are not intended for grain. They're not designed for grain. They do not get the full benefit from it. I'm not saying the grain itself, is what's in it, is bad for the horse, but the horse isn't getting the goodness out of it because they're not designed to eat this stuff. So I mean, from that standpoint, it's pretty much waste of money buying all this stuff if they aren't going to get much out of it. The other thing is that because they are designed to eat forage and grain, or hay and forage and that sort of stuff, and metabolize it properly, plain old hay will do a lot more to keep your horse warm than all these extra supplements and grains that you're giving it. And people try and convince you got to give it because they don't want the horse getting skinny over the winter. It's got to have all this extra food to keep it warm. No, it doesn't. Hay is the best thing there is to keep a horse warm. It will generate the most heat while it's being digested. It's the most readily digested, so that they can get the energy from it that they need. Well, and then there's another problem, is that in North America in particular, obesity in horses is almost epidemic. I've read a few articles that say that, and my personal observations agree 100%. Well, we got about somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 horses out here, 40, 45, I don't know. I haven't counted them lately. Numbers are always changing. It's not my job, but there's none out here that aren't fat, except for one senior that's got a few health issues and a few youngsters that are too young to get fat yet. Even some of them are borderline. But all the adult horses, pretty much every single one of them is overweight, and some of them pretty serious. Even a couple of my own, unfortunately. Although I don't have an adequate amount of control over the way they're being fed and that, so I think they're actually getting a little bit too much. But horses don't really need that much. Now, here's the other part, and I've done a little research on this too, and all of these topics that I'm going to talk about, feel free to do research on them. In fact, I encourage it, as with all of my videos. I'm going to give you my opinion on things, but do not take it as gospel truth. Find out for yourself. Do some homework, do some research, read a few articles, watch some videos. Well, the more the better, actually. And, I'm just one person, and I've said many times in the past, my goal is just to get you thinking about things and encourage you to go do your own homework. I'm not going to say, hey, I'm the guy with all the answers. I know stuff, and that'd be silly. And so I encourage you to do your own research. Find out what your horse does or does not need, how much it needs. You could find out you can end up saving yourself a whole lot of money, keep your horse a lot healthier too. Now, it goes back to the overfeeding thing, and where you have obese horses and that's part of the problem is that because of the things that we feed horses that they're not really meant to eat, like alfalfa. Now, lots of people give alfalfa to their horses, and in small quantity, it probably doesn't hurt them one a little bit, but alfalfa was never, ever cultivated for the purpose of horse feed. It was originally meant to be cattle feed, which is why it's got such high calorie content. But somewhere down the line, somebody got this bright idea that maybe it'd be good for their racehorse. Well, next thing you know, everybody's feeding alfalfa to their racehorses. And then that kind of fell over into general practice of feeding horses alfalfa. But really, it's not a good feed for them. It won't kill them in most cases. It's not real bad for them, but it's not a real good thing either, and they don't need it. Worm grass, timony, crested wheat, all kinds of stuff. Weeds, they love weeds, honestly. I know that sounds ridiculous, but actually what's best for your horse is probably the worst hay you can buy. And I know this is going to really rattle a few people's senses, but honestly, buy junk hay, the cheap stuff. As long as it's not moldy and contaminated with things that are bad for your horse. Don't worry about it being, high quality, 25% alfalfa, whatever. No, a horse doesn't need that. Anyhow, back to winter, where horses tend to get overfed and get fat, because they tend not to move much in the wintertime, even if they're out in the pasture, because wherever you put the hay, that's where they're going to tend to stay close to, so they don't get as much exercise, they don't actually burn as much. So they don't actually need to eat as much. And what usually ends up happening is, then you got the whole worrying about, the spring grass with all the sugars in it. Well, I don't know if anybody of you out there have not heard that yet, that you got to worry about keeping your horse off the spring grass. Well, if it wasn't being overfed in the wintertime, that would not be a problem. Because what happens is if they actually do lose a little bit of weight over the winter, which is actually quite normal, then when the spring grass comes up with a little extra sugar in it, their body can handle it no problem because it hasn't been overfed and gotten fat all winter. But if you overfeed your horse during the course of the winter, because, oh my goodness, and lots of people that are very knowledgeable about horses, and I've talked to quite a few of them, and I cannot convince anybody that the horse is being overfed in the wintertime. They just don't believe me. So obviously you're probably not going to either. So do your homework, do some research, find out for yourself, and walk around with your eyes open too and take a look at the horses, and you'll find out that they are in fact overweight. And come springtime, all of a sudden everybody's running around worried about laminitis because they're getting into that spring grass with all the sugar in it that causes laminitis. And if they're prepared for it by not being overfed during the winter, that's never an issue. So I just thought I'd talk about, since it's stinking cold out there in the middle of winter, I thought I'd talk about, how well horses tolerate the cold and how much extra care we need to give them so they can get through the winter. Well, like I said, some places what they have for what they call winter, I would call a nice day, and it unfortunately that we make the thing. This is the thing that happens a lot in many areas with horses, is because of how we feel about something. We think that's the way it is. Well, no, that's not the way the horse sees it. Horses are much tougher than you think they are. They can withstand ridiculous temperatures, extremes colds. I'll give you a caution. if you want to worry about the temperatures that your horse is enduring, worry about the summertime, because horses have a far greater difficulty staying cool than they do staying warm in the winter time, no matter how cold it gets. And there are actually several places in the world where they raise horses in temperatures far more severe than this, where we're talking like minus 40, minus 50 is a regular thing. And even horses like the Icelandics on the island of Iceland, if you're not familiar with that, it's way north. It's way up there. It's a very barren, very sparse amounts of vegetation or anything on there. There's no shelter, no trees. And those little horses do just fine out in the wild on their own. They've existed there since the beginning of time with absolutely not even any shelter, at least no decent amount, that's for sure. And they've survived quite nicely, and they're very hardy little horses. And, well, there's all kinds of stories I could go on about them, but someday maybe I'll have an Icelandic, but that's not what they're talking about. We're talking about cold and winter, and, well, like I said, cold is something. What is cold? It depends on where you live, what you consider to be cold, but I can assure you that horse is a lot tougher than you. It doesn't think it's cold. You might think it's cold, but that horse does not think it's cold. I can assure you that. I have seen, many occasions where they will not even use their shelters in temperatures where we don't even want to be outside. And, well, blanketing, well, like I said, they've been around long, long, long before we ever invented them, and I do not believe that there is anything man-made that can equal the quality of the natural insulation that the horse has. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention too, if you happen to see a horse with a pile of snow on its back, don't worry about it, it's warm. Because if it was losing heat, that snow would melt. Not only that, but snow itself is actually an extremely good insulator. You just ask anybody that's built their house out of snow and heated it with a tiny little fire. Why? Because that igloo, which is built out of snow, is a fantastic insulator. Snow is a natural insulator. It's as good as anything man-made. The hair on the horse, probably better than anything man-made. So you don't need to be worrying about that stuff. And stop overfeeding your horse. Stop wasting money. Just make sure it's got proper nutrition, balance to what it needs. Get some blood tests done. If you want to make sure your horse gets what it needs and give it supplements, do it according to what it actually needs, not what you think it does. Forget the extra grains, forget the extra feeds for winter, because in a lot of places what people consider winter, it's not even a cool day here, so don't worry about that stuff either. The horses will do fine. They've been around since the beginning of time. They don't need our help. They're okay. Have a good day.